picture of all of you so that I have it for my memories. All right. So how's everybody doing?
Better than you?
Better than me. I'm a little nervous. I'm not usually nervous, but I would say the reason that I'm nervous, besides this microphone thing, is that, I'm used to, so I see all the students and I ask them to come because it'll make me comfortable, which is good. I'm used to teaching with students. But I've got my family here, so that makes me very nervous. And then my committee makes me very nervous. So thanks a lot, everybody, for coming. Go ahead.
Give me a minute for ground rules.
Okay.
Do you want questions typically the way it goes is the committee can ask at any point they want. Other than the committee, usually we defer to the end of the presentation.
Okay.
So
I'm comfortable with that.
That's pretty standard.
Okay.
And then there'll be a point when we ask all of you to exit the room.
Okay.
And but not him.
Okay.
And then there's a point we ask him to exit the room. There
you go. So great. So with that, please hold your questions until the end, and I'm happy to answer them then. So let me give everybody a sense for where we're at today and why we're here. So in 2007, I decided to take off on my PhD adventure. I was working at UCF and thought that would be a great idea. So here we are at the defense of the dissertation. What exactly does that mean, right? Well, these guys are my committee. So 4 people that are responsible for deciding whether I graduate or not. They've all been with me different lengths. The longest has been Charlie, and he is my advisor. And he has been at UCF a very long time and on my committee for 11 years. And so it's been a great relationship, and this is sort of the culmination of that. My dad went to school here at UCF, actually, in 1972. I don't know if you were here when he was here.
No.
Okay, so he started in trailer. And so we've had a long history. I got my master's at UCF. I've been teaching here for a long time, and now this is my PhD. So these guys are responsible for deciding whether I'm going to graduate or not. So that's what this is. So it's pretty serious. Thus the nervousness. So I took classes, and I was trying to figure out a project, and I went through a couple of different projects, and I eventually landed on a project unexpectedly when we had a company called Mimic reach out to us and say, hey, we want to work with you guys, and we have this thing called the DV Trainer, and we think some of your students would be good to come work with us. And so we want to come out there and try and hire some of your students. And they told us about the Nicholson Center, which was a place where they had some DV trainers. And it was like, go down there and check them out, and we'll let you know. You'll see what they're like, and you'll understand better. So I went down there. Lo and behold, who did I find? Roger Smith. I knew Roger from before that. I don't remember exactly when we met. And we were touring the facility, and it's actually a really cool place because it's not your typical hospital like I thought I was going to. It's actually a training place where they train surgeons that come in from out of town to do surgery. Now, these aren't just your regular student surgeons a lot of times. They're like existing surgeons that come in to learn special techniques and stuff like that. And in this case, these surgeons are coming in and they're learning about how to use these instruments for doing robotically controlled laparoscopic surgery. So with that, I was touring around the facility. I was pretty cool. And Roger says to me, so what are you doing? Are you on your PhD or what? I'm like, yeah, I'm still looking for a project. He's like, oh, geez, that's easy. Here you go. This is your project. We're doing all kinds of stuff with him. And so that is the short history of how I came to this project, was Roger convincing me I need to do my PhD on it. And he was right. I really found the subject fascinating and went to Charlie and told him about it. And he was very supportive, even though it was like my 3rd or 4th thing. Probably was a little questioning it, but here we are. So it was the one that finally stuck. So what is laparoscopic surgery? Well, first let's talk about open surgery. What's open surgery? Has anybody ever had open surgery? Bet you have. That's when they cut you open, right? They're going to do something and they just make a big long incision and go in there and mess with your guts. I was going to warn you that this is kind of graphic. This is as graphic as it gets, so you're good. Kind of cartoony I was trying for. And so that would leave a big incision and it would take a long time for the patient to heal, right? Well, with laparoscopic surgery, you get much smaller incisions, and they actually insert the instruments into your body through those small slits, and they do similar surgeries. For example, my mom has had a laparoscopic surgery, and she had a hysterectomy, doing it that way, right? So the slits that they make in you heal very quickly, okay? So that makes it very nice, okay? They also put a camera in there, and so that the doctor can see what they're doing as they go around. So if you're wondering how in the world do they see inside the body, that's how. They put a camera in those holes. So Fast forward a few years, and now they create this robotically controlled laparoscopic surgery. Why that? Well, you have the surgeons controlling the instruments. Why not have something that's maybe a little bit more precise, maybe can go a little bit more degrees of freedom and things like that? So they attach a robot to the laparoscopic instruments, and now all of a sudden the doctor, instead of controlling the instruments, they're controlling the robot. So that's a different style and a different way of doing surgery. And so these doctors that are traditional open surgery, maybe they're traditional laparoscopic surgeons, need to learn how to use the Da Vinci. Well, the problem is these Da Vincis are very expensive. What are they, like $1 million?
Closer to $2 million.
Closer to $2 million, okay? So a hospital makes an investment in this. How do you think they're going to pay for that investment? By surgeries with the Da Vinci, right? So there you go. So now I'm a surgeon and I need to learn how to use the Da Vinci, and it's always in use making surgery. So companies like Mimic make these trainers that are cheaper than $2 million. They're about 100 grand, right? Something like that. And so hospitals will buy those and the surgeons will be able to train on those. It's a little bit like doing driver's ed training on a simulator. It's not a car, but you're learning all the ropes. You're learning about how things all work and everything like that. Now these trainers, the people that are making the trainers, they actually make some really nice software that goes with them to kind of level you up. So you're like doing like games and pulling the ring on the rail and match game and stuff like that. Not only do they have kind of these gamey style, but they also have surgery style where it's like simulated surgeries. Like, oh, you want to remove a gallbladder? Here's a gallbladder surgery simulation that you can do. So they're really nice. It's a really nice piece of equipment. But what does any of this stuff have to do with video games, right? Well, it turns out that somebody did a study, Dr. Rosser did a study in 2007 where he showed that, hey, people coming in for training, the ones that have gamed before, that have some experience video gaming, they actually did better on the training. And so there was that kind of established, hey, there's some connection. Actually, the connection was established before that, but that's a really famous study that showed a real connection between the playing of games and the ability to at least train on these laparoscopic surgery units, right? So Rosser and his team continued that. Now you might be wondering, so what? So kids play games, it's not like they're going to go become the doctors, right? You have a medical school you have to go to and stuff like that. So what does it matter that raising your ability on these controllers makes it to where you could do surgery if you're not going to go to medical school anyway? Well, here's the thing is when they study this kind of stuff, it's not to try to make the gamers into laparoscopic surgeons. It's to really just try to understand how the psychomotor skills are being built so that you can better understand maybe medical education in general, right? One of the findings that I would share with you to kind of explain why it's important to kind of do these kind of searches for connections like this is Rosser's team found that, and this is 5 years later, found that, hey, if we take a group of laparoscopic surgeons and before they go in to do their surgery, they play some Xbox games on a controller, right? They actually do better. They make less errors because they're warmed up with the controller. So that was a nice finding. And in fact, they now put Xboxes in waiting rooms and surgery rooms so that the surgeons, before they go in, they can optionally play these games. So nice finding. And that's an example of what I'm talking about. It's not that kids become doctors, but rather that you understand better what's happening. Okay? So now why the connection, do you think? Right? You've got surgeons doing laparoscopic surgeries and you got gamers. What do you see that's similar there? Well, first of all, notice that on the left-hand side, you've got the laparoscopic surgeons looking at the TV. Now, on the TV is a 2D rendering of the 3D world that is inside your body, right? So there's a camera in there and looking at you. So the doctor is kind of having to process that. The gamer is processing that. Here's a 3D environment that artists have created, and the gamer is processing that as they play. So these visuospatial skills, they're called, are the ability for a human to do kind of that 3D to 2D transformation and understand that. If you remember those intelligence tests where they like show you a cube and then it's like rotated and it's like, is this the same one or not? That's what they're testing, is your visuospatial skills. So these people are using visuospatial skills in what they're doing. They're practicing that. They're getting better at that. Okay, that part of their brain is being utilized. How about psychomotor skills, though? That exacting motor control that you can do. On the right-hand side, the gamer's playing, and on the left-hand side, the laparoscopic surgeon is playing. But let's look at that closer, right? You're playing a game with your hands like this, and then what are you doing on the robotically controlled laparoscopic surgeries? You are using the grips to do surgery. So there's reason to believe that the kind of skills that you're developing doing the games are also the type of skills that you would be using with your laparoscopic surgery. So these psychomotor skills, let's talk a little bit about the history of these, right? So way back in 1796, you've got Neville Maskelyne. What do you think he was? He was an astronomer, okay? So he's an astronomer, and he is trying to solve a problem where they need, in the ocean, they need to be able to tell what latitude and longitude they're at when they're in the dark ocean looking up at the stars. So he's trying to solve this problem. They gave a big prize to try to solve it. So he figured out a way he thought he could do it, and his assistant, Kennebrook, and him were trying to do this, and so he set up an experiment where they had to look at how long a planet took to get across the crosshairs of a telescope. And so he took the readings and got some numbers, and then he let Kennebrook do it, and they wwere different readings. So what do you think Maskelyne did with Kennebrook? They were different, so he fired him naturally because he's not able to read. They were wrong, right? I mean, Maskelyne measured it, and it was wrong. Well, it turns out, actually, Kennebrook wasn't wrong. It was Maskelyne that was wrong? No, it wasn't Maskelyne that was wrong either, right? Bessel came along 25 years later and said, guess what? If we all did that experiment, we'd all come up with something different. Why is that, right? He postulated something called a personal equation. So that basically means that I'm different than you, different than you, different than you, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody is different, and so when I look at the clock and take down the reading, it was different than when you did that. So everybody's going to have slight differences in how they control their motor. And so, in fact, that was kind of the first time it was recognized that, hey, everybody's a little bit different, and there's not a right answer, there's everybody's answer, okay? So how does this work exactly? Well, since then, we've kind of figured out that, hey, the brain has these different areas that control different things, like the visuospatial skills, the motor cortex, and things like that. So now we completely understand that, oh, this area of the brain is what is building out when you're doing these motor type skills, and that everybody's different. Obviously, everybody's got a different brain, just like you have different eyes and everything else. And so it's natural that people are going to be different and have different readings for these things. Now, back to that time of the world, this guy Fletcher Dressler in 1892 decided to start kind of trying to measure and quantify some of this psychomotor stuff, right? So he came up with a pretty simple experiment that probably a lot of us would come up with just to start to study this, where he took a telegraph machine and he asked people, tap it as fast as you can. And we're trying to measure how fast can you tap this if you're going as fast as you can. And what do you think he found? Well, he found an average human is about 8.5 times per second that you can do that. But he also found everybody's different. Okay. He also looked at different factors that affected that, like time of day, things like that. And one that he found that was really interesting that affected it was if you did something that was mentally challenging beforehand and then did it, you went faster. There was no doubt about it. He did several different mental challenges. This is the graph for sorting cards. So he would have people sort cards really fast and then do the tapping. And after that sorting, they could do the tapping faster. It looks like it goes down, but that's the time between taps. So the time between taps goes down, meaning that the speed is going up. And so that was a very revolutionary finding, because all of a sudden you're tying in, the quote was, increased central activity and the unconscious tension of the muscles attending this central excitation. It's like something about that sorting cards is charging up your brain, and now you're better at psychomotor skills. You're better at doing things. So it was a great finding for the time. Okay? Around the same time, a little bit later, a couple of French psychologists were coming up with intelligence tests. And maybe some of you have heard of this test. It's called the Stanford-Binet Test. Still used today, very popular. So let's look at a couple of the questions at the Stanford-Binet questions. For a 4-year-old, they'll ask them things like, fire is hot, ice is blank. Can they get that or not? It's a measure of their intelligence. How about for a 6-year-old? Tell me the difference between a fish and a horse. Right? So these are questions that obviously all of us can answer, most of us could answer. And it's a very well accepted intelligence test, even today. It's definitely used. Well, Stanley Porteous was an Australian psychologist, and he got booted from University of Melbourne Psychology School. And he was head of a school in Australia, but it wasn't a normal school that you're thinking of. It was actually a school for challenged kids, like mentally challenged kids. And he did not like the Stanford-Binet test. The reason he did not like it is because he felt like it was culturally biased. That, hey, there's kids that grow up and don't know what a fish and a horse is, but that doesn't mean that they're not as intelligent, raw intelligence, as those kids that do know that stuff, right? So he felt like that test was biased, and he wanted to make a test that wasn't biased, that was just anybody could take it and it would be a true measure of intelligence. And he came up with the Porteous maze test, which is still used today, still popular, and still a good measure of intelligence. How that works is basically you're presented with these challenges. And you can see here, he says here, year 8. And what you're doing is you're trying to see how fast they can complete these mazes. And you can see in this, maze right here, the obvious dead end, right? So you wouldn't take that. If you do take that, you've got to start over. You can't double back on yourself. So how long it takes you to do this maze is your score, okay? So, and it turns out that's a very good measure of intelligence because you're measuring things like path planning, like seeing a problem coming up and avoiding it, stuff like that. Well, here's something you might not expect, is you might think that the scoring on that would strictly be how long it takes you to do them, and that's it. But he had another element of the scoring that was really important, and that was how well did you do the line? And in fact, did you touch a line when you were doing it? Were you able to draw that line in between those lines? And if you weren't, if you hit it, depending on how many you hit, you lost points for that, okay? So your basically general intelligence score went down if you couldn't draw that line in there. Your psychomotor skills being shown to be a factor in your intelligence. Thomas Macquarie saw that test and modeled his test after it a few years later, in 1927. He was at USC. And he devised a test. Only his hopes was to create a test for industry, not for testing children. And what this test did is very similar to the Porteous test, only it wasn't a maze at all. It was just strictly draw the lines in between the holes and do them as many as you can for 50 seconds. And your measure was how far could you go. And this is a pure psychomotor test of just how far can you go. Another test was just put dots. Put dots in the circles, okay? And so that was a great measure of someone's intelligence. In fact, Mary Burr was the head of a nursing school, and she used the Macquarie test and tested all the nurses in 1934 coming into a nursing school, and then looked at their results coming out of nursing school, and in fact, this was an incredibly good predictor of how they would do in nursing school, right? Is just raw psychomotor skills. So very interesting stuff. So those are called pen and paper tests. Now at the same time, or a little bit later going on, we have other psychomotor tests being developed. Now this one is sort of the gold standard of psychomotor tests that I wanted to tell you about, called the Purdue Pegboard. So I actually took that picture about 2 weeks ago. I was up at Purdue, and that is the Lafayette Instrument Company where this board is still made. Now I'm going to pass this board around because I bought one. I bought one just for this purpose. I won't give it to you guys, I'll give it to them. That way you don't have to get up, Rudy. But I wanted you to be able to see it. It's still manufactured today and sold. They actually get kind of a premium on it. So that's cool. But I walked up to that door and bought it at Purdue University. That's the place that's allowed to sell them. Now I didn't go up there just to buy that. I also was doing something else. So. But the nice thing about the Purdue test, so the way it was originally designed was it was designed for like assembly line workers. Like you're going to go work on an assembly line and they want to see how well can you do the typical tasks of an assembly line worker. In this case, what you're doing is you're going up and you're getting a pin and you're coming down and you're putting it into a hole and you're doing that as fast as you can. First with the right hand, then with the left hand, then with both hands. And those times that it takes you to complete those tasks is what your score ends up being, okay? And there's also a grooved version of it where it's very similar, only you also have to take and turn the pig when you put it in. So very, very similar. So these are the Purdue Pegboard, and it's a mechanical test as opposed to a pen and paper test. And invented, like I say, 1948, but still very much in use even today. So you're seeing a lot of research using psychomotor skill testing for this. The obvious place is like I had said, you know, finding people that can actually do these skills quickly. If you get 1,000 applicants for an assembly line job and you want to get down to the best 50, the Purdue Pegboard is how they do that kind of a thing. But what are the research applications of this sort of thing? What kind of research involves figuring out these psychomotor skills and how people are doing it? Well, we've already talked a little bit about that. Laparoscopic surgery is a place where some of this research is happening, where they're trying to measure psychomotor skills. So how about, do people that do better on the Purdue Pegboard do better in laparoscopic surgery, right? Well, Dr. Stefanidis up at Indiana, he was at Tulane at the time he did the research, but he's at Indiana now. He developed an experiment where he took and did 5 psychomotor skill tests and then looked at how they did in laparoscopic surgery. So his 5 tests were the Tremor Test, where you basically are measuring how much somebody can hold something still. Okay, and he used a little mini shaker and just something that could measure small vibrations very accurately. Then a reaction time test where he had a board of lights, and then as the lights turned on, he clicked them. You would click them, and it would measure the time that it took you to release and the time it took you to press down. A finger tapping test, similar to what we talked about earlier, where how fast can you tap? They did it 5 times for 10 seconds each time. And then the Purdue Pegboard you're looking at now, that was one of his things, and then the grooved Purdue Pegboard. So he looked at those 5 tests and tried to find which ones of these led to somebody, if they did well in this, they also did well on laparoscopic training. Which tests do you think did well? Any guesses? Charlie?
Pegboard.
The Pegboard, right? Of course, it's the gold standard. It better have. Well, here's what we found. The Tremor Test was not good, not a good indicator. The reaction time test, not a good indicator. And the Purdue Pegboard, although it was very close, was not a good indicator. They found that the grooved Purdue Pegboard and the finger tapping test both showed significant correlation between those test results and the laparoscopic surgery ability. So that's what they found. So I wanted to build on this study and think about the Rosser experiment a little bit, and I just forgot to move that slide. That's good. Going back to the Rosser experiment, after talking about the Stephanitis experiment, I wanted to talk a little bit about this and tell you that what they did is they found that not only did they find that the gamers do better in laparoscopic surgery, but what did they ask to kind of figure out if you were a gamer or not? So what they did is they broke up, they asked everybody how much games they play per week, right? And then they broke them into similar sized buckets, right? They didn't go into it with any preconceived notion of how much people play. But they took their sample size and then they just broke them up. And what they found was they had roughly equivalent sizes of 0 hours, so non-game players, 1 to 3 hours of gaming, and then more than 3 hours of gaming. So what he showed in his experiment was if he took the extremes, the people that played more than 3 and the people that played none, that he saw a 37% better performance in the laparoscopic training and fewer errors when he compared those extreme buckets. So that is why we're seeing some correlations there. And so you've got his test saying, hey, it's pretty clear that either visuospatial, psychomotor, both are leading to these findings. So that must be solved science then, right? We figured it out. It's tied. Yes, it's connected. Oh, well, not exactly. Here's another test by Dr. Madan, who what he did is he asked people to rate themselves as novice or expert in each of these categories. So what are these categories? Using chopsticks, typing, sewing, musical instruments, and finally, gaming. Okay? So people rated themselves, and then he took them through the laparoscopic training, and which do you think he found was significantly correlated with laparoscopic surgery skill? The chopsticks. That was the only one he found that was correlated. In fact, they had a quote in their paper that said, we honestly were surprised that playing video games didn't correlate with baseline laparoscopic skills. So as Rosser had predicted, or I think he's a little bit before Rosser, but there was stuff before Rosser, basically it was, people kind of thought it would be, but now he's saying it isn't. So what's the difference then? Why are we seeing these differences in these experiments where some people are saying it's connected, some people are saying it's not connected? So I came up with a hypothesis that when you're just saying gaming, that's too broad. It's like not all gamers are created equal. And there's lots of different ways to game. Even in 2005, there were lots of different ways to game. Okay? And so depending on the type of gamer you are, that may lead to better laparoscopic skills, right? And so I wanted to devise an experiment where I tried to figure that out. So here's the experiment that I designed. I took a pure gaming population now. So instead of having these gamers and non-gamers, I said I want 100% gamers. And I want to ask them all about their gaming habits, what types of games they play, how much they play, things like that. And then I want to run them through the tests. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create simulated versions of these tests and do them on a controller and see if I can tell the difference between people that actually use analog controllers with their gaming or play these certain types of games and people that don't. People that would normally be included in a broad bucket of gamer in a lot of research can I see a big difference in their psychomotor skills? Meaning, hey, you need to split these people up because that's not a fair way to categorize people anymore. So these are the 5 tests that I wanted to try to simulate. And then once I got those simulated, what I would do is I would try and rank the gamers by psychomotor skill. Like, here's a good psychomotor skill person, here's a bad psychomotor skill person based on their scores in these different categories. And then I would have a look at, hey, did they play more analog controller, the better ones, or did they not? So that's kind of the idea. But instead of ranking them across all of the categories, what I wanted to do is I wanted to say, okay, do I see statistical significance in any of these categories first and foremost? If I do see the significance, then I'll use that category. If I don't, then I won't use that category, meaning either the test was flawed or whatever. So I only wanted to narrow it down to the categories that I showed significance in when I was creating their rankings. And I computed an individual score for the 5 ratings for whatever categories there were going to be. And then I summed those up, and that's your psychomotor skill. So I didn't weight anything or anything like that. And then once I was all done with that part of the test, what I wanted to do was just to kind of check to see if we felt like maybe there would be some reason to pursue the laparoscopic angle. Let's take some of the best performers and some of the weakest performers and throw them in the laparoscopic machine and see if they actually don't do as well. See if the high performers actually do better in the training than the low performers, just to kind of test it. So that's the idea. So I needed to come up with some controller-based psychomotor skills tests to perform this. And so that was a big part of the challenge of this. And so let me tell you about each of the tests I came up with. The first one was the tremor test. Remember where I said you had to hold it steady? What I did on this is I had this circle moving around the screen, and you controlled it with the left analog or right analog. I think it was the right analog stick. And you try. The goal was to keep the small circle in the big circle as it moved around. To the extent that you were able to do that, that shows good psychomotor skills, good tremor, like you were able to kind of keep it steady. The reaction time test, what that is you basically hold down the green button on the controller, and then when the screen tells you to press the red button, you release the green button. That time is recorded. Press the red button, that time is recorded. So it's the amount of time it takes you to press those. With the finger tapping test, what I chose to do was with the analog sticks, click. I did a left one and a right one. And just measure the amount of clicks that you got in a certain amount of time. I did what Stephanitis did. I did 5 times. I did 10 seconds each. Okay. The Purdue Pegboard was the most interesting to try to simulate. And so here's what I chose. I was really happy with the way this one turned out. So what you do here is the pegs are the little circles that you see. And basically what you're doing is you're going up with the controller, and you go up to what I'm kind of thinking of as the peg dish. And then you pick up a peg by clicking on the analog controller. Then you bring it down, and you've got to put it into the circle. This was an attempt to simulate how the pegboard has gross motor skills and then fine motor skills. So this is like move it all the way up, get it in the larger center, then move it down and get it precisely in the middle until it changes color and then click. The speed with which you can do that several times, that's your Purdue Pegboard score. The grooved version of the Purdue Pegboard, oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to tell you that I also made it just like the pegboard, where it's like you do it with the left hand, then you do it with the right hand, only it's thumbs instead, right? And then you do it with both simultaneously. So it was definitely challenging, and I watched the gamers do one, then the other, then both. A lot of the people that participated in the experiment are here. You may remember this one, because this one is definitely the one that gave people the most headache. The grooved version of the test, in real life, it's just a peg that you have to rotate. Here what I did is it's basically exactly the same as the groove test, or sorry, as the regular Purdue Pegboard test, only you had to rotate it at the end with the analog stick. So how did it turn out? What was the population of people I was able to get to do all these tests, right? I asked them in the survey, I asked them things like, how much did you use the controller? So making sure that they were a gamer. What types of games do you play? And then a couple of questions I threw in at the end after doing some research were actually turned out really cool. One is, have you ever practiced a video game before? And that question has been shown in research to be a great indicator of game skill. And so have you ever practiced one? And then have you ever competed in an online or in-person tournament? So those two, in past research, have indicated, hey, this person is probably a good gamer. And so I asked those as well to kind of look at those through the data. So now the population I got a total of 100 players exactly, okay? On average, they played 16.59 hours of games per week, okay? So definitely a gaming population. Now, it was nice for me that I had 50 that played 6 or more hours of a week on the analog controller and 50 that played less than 6. So that was a nice separator for me with a good population on each side. If you're interested, 29 had played 10 or more hours and 27 had played less than 3 hours per week. Those are all with the analog controller. Okay, so I got a good variety of gamers. It wasn't just everybody console gamers and with controllers. I was able to get a good mix of people. So that was good. So the question is, can I tell a difference between these people, right? I've got people that are playing 20, 25 hours with the controller, and then I've got people that aren't playing at all with the controller. They're just strictly PC people. Is my experiment going to be able to figure out that they're different, and more importantly, then draw the conclusion that, hey, if experiments are using these as a group, they're pretty different, and that's probably not a great thing to do. So here's my results. Now I want to spend a little bit of time on this screen telling you about the way to read these results. So this is greater than 6 hours and less than 6 hours of analog controller usage per week. So these are the people that use controllers that much, right? So remember I told you there's 50 of each. So here's 50 that use 6 or more and 50 that use it less. Where it says the mean, that's if you take the average of all the scores for that group, that's what it is. Now you might say, well, if the mean is 2455, now this is the Tremor test, this is the amount of frames that it was in the circle, so the higher the better, okay? So you might say, oh, well, if the mean is 2455 and the mean over here is 2340, that means the people that was greater than 6 hours are better, and you can draw that conclusion. Well, that's not the way statistics works. You have to look at the variation and the standard deviation, really, of the sample to determine whether it's actually statistically significant. And what that statistically significant means is that can you generalize this finding? Can you take your study and say, okay, that means that for any study, this would be the finding? And normally the threshold here is 0.05 is what you're looking for. 95% chance that there is a generalizable finding here. And that's what, when we call that statistically significant. And that just means that it's very likely to be true. So you're looking for these numbers to be under 0.05, preferably way under 0.05. The further under 0.05 it is, the more likely it is. So in this example right here, this one is 92.7% chance of being true across a generalization, which isn't enough usually to call it significant. But that doesn't mean that we didn't see a trend towards it, and you can definitely see that that data is showing that people with controller experience are scoring better, for sure. Okay, come down here to the practicers, and you can see the practicers doing better. I've got 70 practicers and 30 non-practicers. So that's just the sample I have, okay? And so you'll see on these, I won't go through every one of them, but you'll see where I'm kind of, I'm trying to kind of pull out. So obviously I did a ton of analysis on this data and looked at all kinds of different things. For the purposes of this slide, I tried to kind of come up with some of the more interesting things to show you as opposed to just absolutely giving you everything. So this is the Tremor test. Short answer here, didn't really see any significant findings on the Tremor test. I was not super happy with the Tremor test and the way that the analog stick worked. I didn't feel like it was sensitive enough to be able to do this. They have those vibration machines that I think probably are much more sensitive than the analog stick on these controllers. And so I was not at all happy with this result. I don't know that I could do anything with the given hardware to do that. And so, yeah, maybe I could sit down and try to redesign it, but that's not my plan. With the reaction time test, absolutely no correlation at all with the analog controllers. You can see here, in fact, that the means are identical, right? So 0.34 and 0.34 for the 6-hour group. So really just nothing to draw from there. But if you look at the non-practicers and practicers and the competers versus non-competers, there you do see some differences. You have the practicers getting a press time of 0.08 and the non-practicers getting 0.1. So they're definitely pressing faster if they've practiced before. So that was kind of a cool finding. You're finding that the practicers and the competers seem to be able to do that faster, or at least want to be able to do it faster, so they do it faster. Whether they can or not is another question, but they definitely do in my testing. How about the tapping test? So this is the number of taps that they did, okay? And so, and if you're wondering how I got this, it's 5 tests, but it's only one number. It's the average of the 5 tests, okay? And I also removed any crazy outliers. So sometimes it's less than 5, but it's almost always 5. Sometimes I'll find a 0 in the data, or I'll find something wacky and I won't include it in the data. So in this case, I've got on the left tapping, remember I told you I was doing left tapping and right tapping. On the left tapping, I've got 50.51 as a 50.51 taps and I've got 47.73. And so you're seeing a statistically significant finding here that the people with more than 6 hours, greater than or equal to 6 hours of analog controller usage are definitely better, and that feels generalizable. It's about a 98%, 97% chance that that is generalizable. So statistically significant finding there. If you look at the right tapping for the right-handed versus left-handed, I was interested in that. It does show statistically significant, but I had, unfortunately, 91 right-handed gamers and only 5 left-handed gamers. So that makes the stats kind of tough. And if you're wondering where the other 4 are, those are reported as ambidextrous. So I don't include them in that. And so you're seeing that, yes, even though I don't have very many, it is pretty significant difference between the right-handed people being able to click on the right-handed analog stick faster. And on the left tapping, I didn't see the same, although I did see the left-handed people doing better than the right-handed people on the left tapping, but it wasn't statistically significant. Again, a lot because of that 5, just not enough people to be able to draw that. And I do see on the left tapping that the competers are definitely doing better than the non-competers on that. So you're seeing those findings. On the finger tapping as well, I thought I'd look at some genres. So hey, fighting game players. I had 21 fighting game players of the 100 people that I tested. And did fighting game players with that tapping mechanic, did they do better than that? Yes, they did. 59.46 taps on the right tapping and 52 on the left tapping, both very statistically significant. It would appear from this data that fighting game players definitely tap faster than non-fighting game players. Rhythm games, another one of the genres that I asked about. Unfortunately, I only have 4 people that play rhythm games. So that kind of stinks. But I wanted to look at it because of, rhythm games, you think of fast tapping. And sure enough, you've got a really statistically significant finding, even though there's only 4. I would love more samples before I would actually do something with that. The Purdue Pegboard, my personal favorite test. How'd that do? Well, the greater than 6 hours group and the less than 6 hours group, sure enough, fantastic statistical significance. I was able to see the 10.75 versus 11.71. Unfortunately, that wasn't really the same in the 10-hour group. I guess that's what data does sometimes. But I only had 29 in that group, and although they did do better. Remember that these are times to complete, so lower, better, sort of like golf. And so you did have the analog controller coming in there for the left Purdue. You find down here that the competers, the practicers, right-handed versus left-handed, you weren't really seeing any statistical significance on the pegboard other than the analog controller usage. That was where I really saw that. Now, how about the right Purdue? Same, only this time I'm also seeing on the 10 hours and less than 10 hours that it's also good. So you're seeing definite statistical significance on the Purdue tests with the analog controller. And on the right Purdue, I also saw the competers do better than the non-competers. How about the both Purdue? That's like the real challenging one, the one that really separates it out. And sure enough, I mean, look at that, greater than 10 hours. It's like, just amazing statistical significance on that. So that both Purdue test is very good at telling apart the people, the analog controllers from the non-analog controllers. And again, the competers do well on that. Now, how about the grooved Purdue Pegboard? Now, here's the time when I'm going to tell you I did not love my implementation of the grooved Purdue Pegboard. I felt like there was too many people that kind of struggled with it in the end. And so in watching the tests, I didn't feel great about it. I felt like there was a learning curve about it. And so the data I don't trust too well, although I'm presenting it to you here. And I did see the finding. I believe that these findings are definitely just because of the non-grouped portion, and that the grouped portion just added sort of a bias onto the data, that everybody struggled with it, so everybody did the same. And so whatever the Purdue Pegboard did is what the grooved Purdue Pegboard is going to do. Okay. So how about the overall results? So here is the categories that I chose, the statistically significant categories that I chose to average them in. Purdue left, Purdue right, Purdue both, tapping left, and tapping right. So those are the categories that I said, okay, let me take your score in those categories and then divide you by the average. So 1.0 would be the average gamer, okay? And then add them up, sum them up. And so the average gamer would score a 5.0 if they were average in all of those 5 categories. And here's the psychomotor skill bell curve I got. So this is how many participants were in each of these buckets. I separated it out here into 7 buckets. And you can see that I've got a cluster up here. So I've got a reasonable number of gamers in the like 5.5 to even somebody at 6.28. Okay, and then I've got some down there. So exactly what you would kind of expect, sort of a normal distribution around that. So then the question is, are these people up here that are scoring so well on these tests, are they the analog controller players? Or is it just an even distribution and it's PC gamers, it's analog gamers, it's whatever, it doesn't matter. And so here's what I found. Well, the top 15 psychomotor skill scorers average 10.13 hours per week on the analog controller. The bottom 15 scores in the psychomotor skills average 3.67 hours on the analog controller. So indeed, it's definitely people that are playing these analog controllers that have the better skills in there. And you can look very plainly at the box and whisker plot here and see that very definitely the analog controller players are the ones that are scoring the psychomotor tests the best. Another interesting finding is if you're thinking, oh, well, maybe the top scorers are just the ones that play more in general. It's like, well, no, if you look at their PC gaming hours, the top 15 scores are 9.53, the bottom 15 are 10.58. So they definitely are gamers. Anybody would call them a gamer. If you're going to play 10.5 hours a week of PC games, you're a gamer. If a researcher asks you, are you a gamer? Answer yes. How many hours per week? 10.58. It's like, okay, you're an avid gamer. Get in the avid gamer group. So I thought that was really interesting, that I could see that those bottom 15 scores, people with clear poor psychomotor skills in this group of 100, would be considered gamers by a lot of researchers out there. Okay. So then I took 5 actually, from the top 10 scores and 5 from the bottom 10 scores, and I ran them through 4 laparoscopic tests just to see how they score on it, just to see, hey, do these findings feel maybe like these people would have done better? You know, it's pretty time consuming to do this, so the thought of running 100 people through the laparoscopic was a little daunting. But I ran 10 through it, 5 from the top, 5 from the bottom, and I have the results for you here. So in the camera targeting module, which is one where you kind of drag the camera around and you're learning how to use the camera on the device, you can see that the scores on the DV trainer, the score's positive, better. You did well. Here we have 531.8 versus 313 for the bottom. So definitely better. This, I'll just fast forward for you. This was the only one that was statistically significant. Remember, I've only got 5 on each side, so not very many subjects here to draw any major conclusions. But that really wasn't the point of this. This was just more for completeness and seeing that, okay, yeah, the top scores do appear to do better than the bottom scores in the laparoscopic machine. Okay. I did the pick and place. And on this one, you had to place the jacks in the appropriately colored dish. And the scoring was 672 to 508. So you might say, oh, well, that's more difference, or it's actually not more difference. But why isn't that statistically significant? The variance also plays a part. And the higher variance is caused by the lower number of samples. And so it's just hard to get statistical significance. But you're already tending towards it. 87% chance that it's generalizable. I did matchboard, which people really struggle with the matchboard, I found. Even the good psychomotor skill players. The matchboard, they would get hung up on one and they couldn't nudge it in and stuff like that. So this was an annoying test for me because I would watch a good psychomotor skill person kind of go through it and then get hung up on something. And then they were taking a lot of time to do it. Whereas maybe a rougher, one of the lower ones, they would like luck into it falling in, and so those scores, and I feel like a bigger population would have helped me get around some of those inconsistencies. And then ring and rail was another test where you take this ring and you take it around the rail and get it to the end. So you have to show some dexterity with the laparoscopic machine. And you can see here the scores also better for the top, but not statistically significant. Again, not very many participants. So what sort of conclusions am I drawing from this experiment? Well, I would say that psychomotor tests showed significant differences in the gamer-only population. So when I took a population of 100% gamers, I definitely see a difference between the top end and the bottom end when it comes to how they perform on these psychomotor skill tests. So that's a good takeaway. I thought that the Purdue Pegboard really did well, and just like everybody keeps coming back to the physical version of that Purdue Pegboard. I love that test, and I would definitely count on both tests as being a very good indicator of how good somebody is in a game. Really like that one. And then it was also, when you look at the data, very easy to see the difference between PC gamers and non-PC gamers. If you look at the raw data, you could just see the numbers getting bigger as you went down the psychomotor skill list of people. There's plenty of people in the bottom of the psychomotor skills portion that have good numbers of PC gaming hours. So these are avid gamers, people that play 20, 25 hours a week of games and just don't develop those skills. And so my bottom line finding is researchers looking for psychomotor skills in gamers should be sure to choose gamers with the right kind of gaming experience as part of their experimental process. Like, don't just say, are you an avid gamer, yes or no? Now you're in the gamer group, and now we're going to try and draw conclusions like the chopstick people did, right? I'm guessing the chopstick people just found a bunch of PC gamers and called it a day and didn't really think about that. So future work, where I want to take this from? Well, I love the Pegboard, as you know. I wish more people at Purdue like Joseph Tiffin. None of them have heard of him, and that sucks. But I actually went and found the Joseph Tiffin papers at the Purdue Archive Library. Unfortunately, nothing about the Pegboard was in those. I would love to, as a first pass, let my subjects take the Purdue Pegboard test and see if my findings on the Purdue Pegboard simulated matched the real Purdue Pegboard. That would be pretty cool to do. I would like to further refine my experiment to understand some other factors that could potentially change how psychomotor skills are being recorded. When I was watching people play, I got some ideas about how to do that, and I would love to do that. I don't really want to tell it to everybody here because maybe some of you will be subjects for that test, and if I tell you about it, then it's immediately you can't do it. I would really like to focus my research not so much on the laparoscopic end of things, but rather the game design end of things. So I'd really like to be able to be a source for game designers to be able to say, okay, here are some base psychomotor skill performance measurements for gaming demographics. Like, hey, if you're an avid gamer and you play this much, this is how you can do on these different buttons, button combinations, doing things on the screen. How does that impact how fast you can press? Things like that. I would really like to have a look at psychomotor and its effects on how game designers think about their gaming demographics. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge some of the people that helped. There's my faithful research assistant up there. She collected a lot of the data. And everybody in here, you all supported me, especially those of you that took the test. I really appreciated that. That was awesome. Who do you not know on this list? This guy right here? Nobody knows him, right? Yeah, that's just for me. No, that's the guy that was in charge of the University of Utah Electrical Engineering program who helped me. And here's Tom and Sophie. So that's it. So I'll open this up to any questions. Would you like them? Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to, I'm a little obsessed with this, that the folks who have a lot of experience doing things like with the Da Vinci claim that they get haptic feedback that doesn't exist.
Interesting.
There is no haptic feedback. And they claim, is 300 hours the magic number? That's what Vipin claims, but I don't know if that's true.
I don't know.
Yeah, but his claim is that about 300 hours of experience, you actually sense in your brain, you get haptic feedback.
Without it actually being there.
Without any haptic feedback. And the hypothesis, it is visual feedback that is being translated to haptic because when you touch something, it becomes paler in the body because you're actually cutting off some of the blood supply. There's a bunch of other visual things.
Got you.
And I was wondering if there's any experiment, if you see generalization of this thing, do you see in gamers without haptic feedback in devices them actually getting a sense that they're touching a wall, that they're...
Not in my experience. Does anybody have any experience with that? I haven't ever heard of that. Go ahead.
Sometimes using a mouse, I did do competitive Overwatch. Sometimes when you use a mouse, you sometimes get that stimulation feedback. I don't know if it's across the board clear, but it is. Sometimes it happens that you kind of feel the energy of throwing something or getting hit by something. It can happen after you play a ton of games. But it's not something that happens like in any game that I pick up. Just specific games that I've played for years, hours on end.
I am not an avid gamer. And so, neither am I. Yeah, I'm not an avid gamer, so. Do you want to take questions from the gallery? So does anybody have any questions for me? Potentially, probably very easy questions. Go ahead. You can actually, a lot of you know me, you can save your harder questions for later, and I'm happy to answer them. Go ahead.
I was was just kind of curious to see a sort of diminishing returns graph where you plot the number of hours played by, say, a console gamer with their performance on these psychomotor tests. So seeing if there's a point at which, say, 7 hours is like where you can game per week and maximize your psychomotor.
Got you. I did not do that analysis, but that would be interesting, and I have the raw data that I could do something like that. Yeah, Craig?
So a lot of times there's this preconception that sports gamers are very casual.
Okay.
And you showed some of the genres, fighting, stuff like that.
Yep.
I'm wondering, did you test for sports games?
I did.
You did, and how did they fare?
Not good. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because I'm a sports gamer, so obviously that was the first thing I did, right? And yeah, there was no generalizable. One of the ones I thought was kind of interesting. I didn't really talk about it here, but I had this out here, was this tapping, and I thought it was interesting that with the fighting game, clear significance, with the rhythm games, clear significance, but with the FPS, now I have a lot of good FPS data here, 55 FPS players, 30 non-FPS players, but definitely no significant finding on the tapping for FPS players. Now, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, now that could be, you got to remember that there's crossover in these categories, so it could be that a lot of these FPS players are playing PC gaming, and so they're not controller players, and so that's going to have some effect on how that gets interpreted. More interesting would be to maybe take the FPS data down to just the controller players that play FPSs and think about it that way. So there's a little bit of cross-contamination of the data, but I only took this so far.
For the tapping, it's the L3 and R3.
Yep.
So do you often hit those buttons in fighting games or rhythm games?
Well, I agree with you that there's not really mechanics where you're going like that. But what I postulated was that you are going like that with potentially your thumb, right?
Sure, so it's not on the...
It's not on the stick, but it's like the same muscles and the same brain psychomotor. That was why I did I tried to do everything with the analogs.
Right.
So, yeah.
I was interested in this one too, if you captured the amount of shake people had.
Like with the...
Ball clicking, because I hate those buttons. Like,
yeah, and so you're saying do it with the sensor that's in there,
or just,
in the controller?
How much they shake the analog stick.
Got you. Like look at the analog measurement and see. I did not. I only looked for click versus non-click. Wasn't looking at the analog value of the controller. Could have done that, but I did not. Yeah. Yes?
Sorry for asking so many questions.
That's okay.
I was wondering if you had any measurements for analog stick tension.
No.
Whether you had the same controller across the board.
I used the same controller for every one of them. Now what I didn't do is I didn't like get some standardized controller that I had ran through testing and stuff like that. I did not do that. It's interesting you're asking that. But Aaron does a lot with controllers, so that's good. But no, I didn't. I did nothing with making sure that it was a good controller. It was just an off-the-shelf Xbox controller that I used for everyone, same one. So, yeah.
Did you randomize your subjects on what they started with, either left or right?
No.
For a particular task?
Nope, I did not.
Did you perceive any sort of either fatigue or a training that happens after you've either learned the game or you've been pressing on it for so long that you may either experience fatigue or you're now getting more proficient?
Right. No, I didn't see that, and I looked for that. But what I did see initially when I did this with the first few participants was I was noticing that if I didn't get them to kind of, so I guess I didn't mention this, but on my tutorial screens, like this press and hold, in addition to having the tutorial screens explained to them, I then forced them to do it. So they had to like do 2 or 3 to kind of get the hang of it. And so then I started my testing. And so in the beginning, I was seeing those kinds of things where it was like I was getting data for the first couple that were like lousy data. And then when I went to the making sure you know how to do it, like on the Purdue Pegboard, I made you do a peg, come down, do another peg, come down, then you were ready to roll. And so that helped a lot with that. And as far as fatigue goes, I never really got anybody that, at least that I saw, that complained. Did you ever see anybody that like complained that says, I'm getting tired? I definitely didn't see anything statistically in the data that showed me that, I didn't do an exhaustive look. I I looked at, what I did is I averaged the fifth with the first, and they were basically the same.
It probably only happened on the tap. You would have a slower reaction after you,
Oh, with the press?
Yeah, you're talking microseconds.
Okay.
Quickly you're being able to
Okay. So if it's only microseconds, you're not going to see that in this because it's going to be a frame, right? That's all I have is a frame. Yeah.
Do you see a potential benefit in future testing things like endurance, like over a long
Yes,
period?
I do.
Okay.
I do. And I don't want to talk any more about that.
Okay.
But I definitely like that idea, and I've been thinking a lot about that sort of thing, and like how long is too long to force somebody to press as fast as they can? Where do I see that? No, it's not for surgeries for me, it's for game design.
Okay.
So like, how long can a boss fight last? When are you starting to see that fatigue?
Okay. Yeah.
And so I love that idea of how long is it reasonable to expect a game designer to have somebody press at maximum, and where do you see that degradation happen? Yes?
Another way to think along the lines of endurance, but not exactly, but did you see any changes with age of the game?
I didn't control on age. Yeah, most of the people were, they were over 18 because of the IRB. So nobody was under 18. Most of the people would be between 22 and 25. So I wouldn't have had nearly enough data to be able to go outside of that range. It would be great to do, especially if you could get younger and then more experienced gamers and see. But yeah, nothing on that. Yeah, my data would not have supported that. Yeah.
Regarding your controllers, is there any chance of whatever you have found, they're going to embed it in the next version of the hardware?
Can you say that again?
So, for example, you used all this keyboards, right? Fancy ones, some of them being dissected left, right, with lights and stuff.
No, I didn't do that.
Oh,
that was just a picture.
Subject matters?
No, I did not use anything other than an analog controller for my research. Yep, an analog controller. Just like.
My point is to understand if this would be in the future of the next-gen hardware for either Xbox or PlayStation.
What would be?
The key takeaways from your PhD.
Okay, no, I don't believe so. The key takeaways for me would be for researchers.
It did not go anywhere, so
Okay, my key takeaways for this would be for the researchers, especially in the medical community. I believe that right now there is a flawed way in which they get there when they do their gaming, and Roger could speak to that, but I definitely believe that. When you just say, okay, let's get a gamer population and a non-gamer population, and we'll test and see if they're good at something. And just doing that, and we think the gamers are going to be better because they use those controller thingies, and so let's do that. And then it turns out that no, in fact, there's a huge difference between, say, somebody that plays a ton of PC games and somebody that plays a ton of controller games. It's just they're very, very different psychomotor skills. And so when you're trying to test for that, it's just not a great way to do an experiment. You end up with these different results, that, this team says they do and this team says they don't. And it's really that they're not controlling on that variable. That's, I think, the key takeaway.
Do you think on the bottom 15 that you're just getting PC gamers there or liars?
I think I'm getting PC gamers. Why would they be lying?
Just being like, yeah, I game 10 hours a week.
I don't have any sense that the people that I strictly went with people that I knew were gamers. Okay. Absolutely gamers. It wasn't like I went down to the union at UCF. I went into places where I know they're gamers, aka FIA students, sure, developers, things like that. And so I'm very confident in my thought that the population was full of gamers. Now, I do think that there's some potential confounds on, well, how many hours per week do you play? 6. It's like, do you really play 6? Maybe you play 5, or maybe this week you played 15 because that was just released, or whatever. So the average is in itself an unsure thing, but I think it's equally unsure for people. And so you can basically say, okay, well, if you're saying you're playing 10, that might be 8 or 12 or 15 or whatever, but you're more than the person who's saying 1. So I do believe that it's hard to know that they're specifically playing that much, but I don't believe that there was any, to my knowledge, any like specific deceit saying, oh, I want Tom to think I'm cool by playing a lot or something like that, and so I'm going to lie. I didn't get any sense like that.
Your study, I don't think has much confirmation bias in it, which is nice, because a lot of studies do, and what they're trying to do is confirm the results you're looking for. And they go out of their way to do that. I don't see how that would occur in this.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yep, I agree. That I just asked them. I wasn't looking for anything significant, or I wasn't telling them to do something where they had to say. They were just doing the tests I asked them to do. It's not a game. They're not trying to get a high score. The people were just playing it and just doing it as fast as they could, just with their performance. So, yes.
Do you think the psychosocial dimension of this is dominant enough to screen out other psychosocial factors, competition, anxiety, boredom? Like, do you see any scenarios where maybe something might overpower some skill working with a controller to, reduce the score significantly enough for it to be meaningful.
So is what you're asking is that are there other factors at play besides psychomotor skills?
Yeah, if you were working with a social psychologist or something and they were doing parallel research with yours, are there some things that the literature has maybe flagged as other factors in that?
I haven't found anything specific, but I think that my work is reasonably unique, that there might not be research that's flagging me specifically about that. If you have something, I'd be interested. But I will say this. I do think that there is something to be said for just saying to someone, tap it as fast as you can, and they do it, and then someone else tap it as fast as you can, and they do it, that if you're a natural competitor, you are maybe better at getting your full potential. You have that mentality, and so you're used to that mentality, and so you truly do it as fast as you can, and maybe this other person is saying, okay. And if it was like, if you can somehow motivate them to actually do it as fast as they can, then maybe they could actually go faster than they're showing you here. And that concerns me about my data, is that, oh, are you sure you can't go any faster? That kind of thing. And I didn't do anything like that. I just said, tap it as fast as you can, go. And so building on my future work, I want to explore that a little bit and see if I can get some sort of better read on whether what you perform when asked, can I improve on that at all? And I don't want to say too much more than that. But yeah, I do think that there's room for people that don't have very good psychomotor skills in a test like this to actually be capable, sitting right there, of doing more, and they're just not. Because it's a very neutral test.
I don't know if this is a question or not. We'll see how it ends up. But if you think about the Purdue Pegboard and what it was initially assessing, it's doing very boring, monotonous work on an assembly line. Right? You're trying to identify individuals who can do that.
Yes. And the thing I think is nice about that test is that if you say, okay, 1,000 applicants for an assembly line and you're going to get 50, you don't have to wonder if those people are trying to do good on it. They are all trying to do very, very well to get that job. And so you don't wonder, are you really trying your best? It's like they're trying to get that job. And so it's really nice data. So did you guys that took the test, did you really do your best? You weren't getting a job out of it. So did you really do your best? And that's a question I have moving forward, is how do I make sure I'm getting the very best out of people?
Well, and that's very different than a scenario where you're learning how to do surgery, where it's not a monotonous thing at all. And anything dramatic could happen.
Yes.
Something goes crazy.
Right.
So you could potentially do these tests, but in a narrative format or with a game mechanic or something behind it, where you're pressing a button to attack a boss or something. We've talked a little bit about that.
To try to motivate more performance, because it matters.
So are you more motivated if you're more engaged and immersed in that?
Yes,
experience?
I agree.
So in the literature on training surgeons, we and the people who educate surgeons are interested in finding a way to test somebody on whether they'd be good at surgery before they start.
Before they start doing surgery?
Correct.
Like before they start even medical school?
Anytime in there. So you would go into medical school. You're not necessarily going to be a surgeon. Let's say 1/3 or quarter or something like that are going to think about surgery, and they don't start moving in that direction until their latter years of medical school, and they can even change later when they get into residency. So the question is, do you have people who in their mind are determined to be surgeons, but in their hands and in the connection with their mind don't have the capability? And unfortunately, we won't find out until it's very late for them. And so they'll end up becoming surgeons, and they'll end up being bad surgeons. So the question is, could we put them through tests early on when they're about to branch out and sit them down and say, you're going to suck at this. You do emergency medicine, you do something else.
Yeah.
You're really good at the bedside.
I'm honestly surprised that something like that doesn't exist already, because if you look at Stephanitis' experiment, that would be, physical psychomotor skills would seem like would be a baseline for doing that, just like the MCAT is for the medical knowledge, right?
We don't use that. So there are the physical tests like the Purdue Pegboard and Stephanitis' test, but I think there's a role for digital versions that are more accessible. So I don't have to buy you a pegboard. I send you home, I say, download this game from Steam, and you're going to do this stuff, and we're going to use that score on you. And it could be like your tests here, they're test-like, but eventually you could take the things that you've done here and use them to design a legitimate game.
Right.
Where you're playing the game, and it's testing you on the side.
Yes.
And that would be a very motivated crew because they're like, this is determined. This
Whether
is
I'm going to be.
whether I'm potentially a surgeon.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you save a person from a life of misery. It's not only that they die, but it's a miserable life if you get into an area that you're really not good at.
Right.
You discover you wish you hadn't done it, but you're already committed.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
Like me as a professor.
I love it.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting in testing. Have you ever done a visual field test? That one, you've got to hit a button very quickly if you see a light in different spots. So
Okay.
I've
never done that.
Field analysis, determine where your blind spots are. And they'll do that for pilots, but they do that for people who've had optic neuritis and so on. And I've often felt that there's a bias because some people want to be taken care of. So they don't want to do as well, so they're not as motivated. And others have had damage to it, and they're damn determined to say, I've repaired my own system, and I'm going to do better at this thing. So there's a lot of that motivation. I think that you didn't hit that, again, because you had people who already are motivated. They've proven their motivation.
Yeah.
By where they're choosing to go to school, by everything else.
Yeah, that they are gamers and that they, yeah.
Nice, because a lot of other studies I see, as I take those field tests, I'm sitting there, I'm saying, I know I'm determined to do well. Is the next person determined to do well?
Yeah.
They may not be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do wonder a little bit about that with the way that I rolled out the information in the test, that did I emphasize enough that try and do your very, very, very best? You know what I mean? So there could be a little bit of bias there.
Yeah, but I think that people are motivated to do their best if they.
When you tell them tap as fast as you can, did you tap as fast as you could? I hope you did. It's like, some people take it maybe more seriously than others, but yeah.
No, but I think they want to prove themselves to you, and that's exactly what you want in this case.
Yeah.
You want them to be always trying their best.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. Yes.
So, speaking from a game design perspective, do you see the benefit in coming up with a series of tests using a keyboard and mouse, simply because some of the motor skills that go into PC gaming are different from consoles, especially given in the current day and age where we're moving a lot towards cross-platform?
Yeah, I would say for the same reasons that I see value in doing it with controllers, I would see doing it with any sort of input mechanism for games, yes. So PC, keyboard and mouse would be no different than maybe even VR stuff or whatever. How well you can do the inputs as information for gamers, for game designers to be able to design experiences that are going to be better for the demographic that they're choosing. Yes.
I'm going to play my role as a referee now and ask all those who are not on his PhD committee. Thank you.